Dear hotel receptionists of Reddit, who was the most horrible guest you have ever encountered?
Story 1.
I've got a couple. There's a lady who has been a regular guest at my hotel for decades and is crazy entitled. Recently, she decided she didn't like the room she was given, but rather than tell the front desk, she found a maintenance worker and got him to let her into a room that wasn't hers by claiming that she'd lost her key. Then she proceeded to move all of her stuff into the new room. Another guest was a homeless lady who had been staying at the hotel for a few months. Apparently, a friend of her father's was paying for it. One night, she was found in the dry storage room stealing food. When she was evicted, they found her room was full of giant piles of stuff she'd apparently been stealing throughout her entire stay. It was like a hoarder's house. The next day, she snuck back into the hotel and tried to steal more stuff, then set up a camp in the parking lot until the police were called. Finally, years ago, I was working at a hostel in Kyiv. We had this one guest who was absolutely disgusting. He would sit in the kitchen and shovel food into his mouth while staring off into space, crumbs falling all over his body and the floor, then eventually get up and leave without cleaning up after himself. He never talked and he smelled awful. One night, when I was thankfully out with my ex, apparently he shit himself in his sleep so badly it woke up everyone in the dorm. My coworker was unable to wake him up and he didn't seem to be breathing. So he called an ambulance. Paramedics came to revive him. Apparently he's taken a bunch of pills while drinking. Everyone in that dorm had to sleep in the common room that night. All the bedding was thrown away, and the smell still lingered for a couple of days.
Story 2.
Either the regular in room 222, who always wet his bed, or the couple in 250 that were staying with us after their house had burned down, who would inspect their towels each night, and any tiny spot would come exchange them with the front desk, then inspect those. This was a little no-tell motel that sold rooms for $25 a night in 1990, mainly catered to construction workers, cheap business travelers, and people who balked at an ID with their credit card because they weren't using their real name. Our neighbors had a house fire and got put up at a local hotel by their insurance. The hotel eventually kicked them out. They had 9 kids who would spend the day running up and down the halls, non-stop noise complaints. I suspect there was also some kind of hotel blacklist involved, because the next thing we knew, 2 giant trailers were deposited in the yard. One was on either side of the burned-out house, each about 20 feet from our house and the neighboring house on the other side. The town looked the other way on all the zoning laws, because penalizing fire victims was not a good look. The investigation eventually found that they had stacked newspaper up to the ceiling in giant piles in the basement to make money off of recycling. It had caught fire when they ran a kerosene heater next to it. They were lucky they weren't all killed. Eventually, they stopped emptying the sewage tanks from the trailers and started putting soiled toilet paper directly in the construction dumpster facing the street. The wind would catch it and blow it into the neighboring yards. Finally had to get the health department involved. I came home from school and my dad had left a clear plastic bag of the stuff tied with a ribbon for the health inspector. Blur.
Story 3.
There was a man from England staying at our hotel who had bipolar disorder. At first, he seemed like a decent guy, friendly enough, though a bit unpredictable. However, things started to take a strange turn. One day, he began bringing homeless people into the hotel, partying with them in his room. He even showed up with a hickey after one of these wild nights. It was clear his behavior was spiraling out of control. The situation escalated when, during her morning run near the hotel, an unsuspecting woman became his target. Out of nowhere, he ran after her and punched her for no apparent reason. The poor woman ended up with a terrible black eye and understandably called the police. They arrived quickly and arrested him on the spot. As it turns out, the man came from a wealthy family. His father compensated the woman generously for her pain and distress, and as a result, his son was released shortly after the incident. When he was in one of his bad phases, his behavior was even more intolerable. He was rude to everyone, especially the waitstaff and receptionists, making their jobs a nightmare.
Story 4.
One night, a sketchy dude came in with a really long coat. He looked like trouble and like he hadn't slept for weeks. He paid cash, which even 2 years ago was usually a bad sign. I gave him his key and he went to his room. About 5 minutes later, he came back in a huff, yelling. He had a long object inside his coat with his hand on it. He didn't threaten me, but I was on edge. He threw the key over the desk and told me that it didn't work. I looked and let him know that wasn't the key that I gave him, so of course it didn't work. He found the right key and stormed off. About 2 hours later, the police arrive and one is holding one of those parabolic listening devices. They asked if I'd checked the dude in and what room he was in. He was wanted for armed robbery with a shotgun. I gave them the info and they went and staked out the room and arrested him when he came out. It is pretty scary thinking back on it. I'm sure the long object under his coat was the shotgun.
Story 5.
I worked in one of those all-inclusive Giga hotels in Spain. For a fixed price, you have a fixed week of holidays together with thousands of other guests. Check-ins were like guiding a herd of sheep. This story is about an older lady, I assume between 60 to 70 years of age, from the UK. Before she entered the hotel, we were already informed that this guest might be troublesome. Apparently, she visited regularly, like 3 times a year, and always came by herself. The majority of her holiday week, she would hang around the check-in counter, complaining about all sorts of things. My idea was that her complaints were the only way how she learnt how to communicate with others, and effectively to get rid of her loneliness. As the week progressed, me and my colleagues instinctively started to ignore her, as most of her complaints had nothing to do with the hospitality of the hotel. And ignoring her pissed her off, so here we go. One evening, on like her 4th day, she came running and screaming into the lobby, accusing the hotel of robbing her. She said she was already very suspicious of all the staff members, so when she took a shower that evening, she put a shoe on her dining time. When she finished her shower, according to her, the shoe was on the floor instead of on the table. So, someone must have entered her room to rob her. Then she called the police and things kinda escalated. Since the story was so full of holes, the Spanish police didn't do much, and at the end of her stay, she greeted us and said, "See you in 3 months."
Story 6.
I used to work the night audit shift, as I was a night manager, and we had this one guy who became a serious issue. He would periodically come in, but if it was early, like 2 a.m., stroll in. If he saw that there were 2 females, he'd claim the shower wasn't working properly. When you went up, he would start to undress when you had your back to him. Our management was absolutely shite and wouldn't care. So we made it an unofficial rule that if we worked alone, or it was myself and the other female, we would just tell him that our staff policy changed and was now that 2 people had to come up to the room. After that, he just stopped coming less and less. I'm not sure what happened to him, as I was one of the 10 people that management fired, because we knew what was going on at the hotel. The main manager was sleeping with the maintenance man while she was still married, and he was sleeping with her daughter, who may or may not have worked there. That was a blessing in disguise, though I met some cool people that I still talk to today, and that was over 10 years ago.